as were all cases of the children who were so involved with life. So let me go back to where this all started. I was born in Hamburg, Germany, a major city in Germany, on the western coast, northwestern coast, and it's a harbor shipping line, transports, luxuries, students go out of there, so on and so forth. Today, did in the time I was born. I was born in 1935. I was a pretty young guy. In 1933, my family had their first experience. By the way, my family consisted of my older brother, 3.5 years older, my mother and father. In 1933, March of 1933, my family had their first experience of what the Nazi regime was all about. I had a uncle, my mother's brother, a young brother, who was active in a party that was anti-Nazi. He was arrested in 1933, was taken to jail, and then released. And on the way home in front of his parents' house, he was shot and killed. So that was the first. They can't hear. Shot and killed. Is that better?
Yes.
Good. And so that was 19th March of 33. And so that was my family's first experience of the devastation that this regime can cause. Fast forward, October 28, 1938. We heard a knock at the door. This was a Friday morning. We heard a knock at the door. My father went to the door. This was 7 o'clock in the morning. And there was a policeman at the door who said, you have 30 minutes to an hour to prepare suitcases for each of you. You will accompany me to the local police station. No knowledge as to what this was all about. Just simply, you will accompany me to the local police station. And it was the first concept of my family not being in charge of itself, but somebody being in charge of us, other than ourselves. And so we did exactly as we were told. We accompanied the policeman to the local police station, and at the local police station there were many other families who came the way we did, accompanied by a local policeman. And then they put us on trucks and drove us down to the Hamburg jail. And at the Hamburg jail, they separated children and mothers from husbands and fathers. So my father went one place, my mother, my brother, and I went another place. And we spent the day in jail, not knowing what was happening. The evening of that Friday, October 28th, we were then put on trucks again and driven to the main railroad station of Hamburg, Germany. And down at the platform, now it was still mother and my brother and I, not knowing where my father was, so we got to the station not knowing where he was. And it was on the platform of the station that we met. And we then were told we had to get onto the train. Now the train was loaded with people, just as we had to get on, they had to get on. And the train had windows open about this much. So this was, for all intents and purposes, what we call a sealed train. Because you couldn't put your head out, you couldn't jump out, you couldn't do anything of that nature. And so we were then told to find seats, and we did. And we had an awesome experience. We met a relative of ours who was sitting in the same place in the train, and he had in his hand a goblet. It's because this was Friday night, and for the Jewish world, this is Sabbath. And so you have a prayer over wine and over bread on a Friday night. This man came with a goblet and had wine in it. For some reason, he thought about that. I mean, it's the last thing in the world I would think about if I were put into that situation. And he was definitely involved in welcoming the Sabbath, which was an unbelievable experience for all of us. And then we found our seats. The train left Hamburg Railroad Station, and it headed east. You know, north, south, east, west. It headed east. And so it became obvious to us that we were heading to Poland. Poland is east of Germany. And we then became knowledgeable about why we were on this train, why we were selected. It was because my father was originally from Poland. He had Polish citizenship. He was, I guess by definition, a guest in the Germany. And he met my mother in Germany. My mother was born in Germany. They were married in Germany. But that didn't matter. They picked up all families where the head of household, my father, in those years there was a separation of male and female. Not like today. We live in the equal world, a more equal world than we did in those years. And so, because he was Polish, the German government decided to ship out all families, all Jewish families, where head of household was Polish. And the reason for that was the Polish government, a few days before, had said and announced that all Polish citizens who lived outside the country, if they didn't return by a certain date, would lose their Polish citizenship. So Hitler decided, oh, what a nice time, perfect time, to take these people, these Jewish people whom we want to get rid of anyway, and get them out of here. And that's why we were on this train. And so this train went and came to stations, German cities along the way. One city was Berlin, another city was, I forget exactly where. But on one of those stops, the train stopped, my mother had, for some reason, a postcard in her pocketbook and wrote a postcard to her parents who lived in Germany, telling them what was happening to us. And she put her hand out, this 3-inch opening. There was a guy on the platform, and he took the postcard, and she asked him to mail it. And as the train pulled out, he tore it into little pieces and threw it away in the garbage. So that was the attitude of the people about we who were being shipped out of Germany. The train kept going east, and by Saturday morning, early Saturday morning, it stopped. It was the last town of Germany called Neubenchen, and they took us off the train, and they then marched us with German soldiers in back of us with guns, weapons, marched us to the German-Polish border. And we all ended up at the German-Polish border, the German soldiers in back of us, and as we get to the border, there's always a no man's land between two countries. There was a no man's land. And on the other side of the no man's land were the Polish military with guns facing us. So the Germans kept pushing us toward no man's land, and we're looking at the Poles with guns in their hands. Well, my father said to us, stay back, and we did, because there were many, many people there. And suddenly somebody ran across to the Polish side. Everybody got up and did the same thing. The Polish soldiers never shot. And so we were now on the Polish side of that border experience. The town in Poland was called Szczecin. I won't spell it for you because you don't have to remember that for a spelling test. And the Polish government did not really know that we were coming. So the question becomes, what do we do with all these people? And so the first thing they did, they took horses out of the stable and lots of horses. And the stable was large because in those years, armies had cavalries. Cavalries were armies with horses, soldiers on horses. We don't see that today, but we did in those years. And so the military horses came out, and the humans came in, the same straw on the floor, and that's where they put us. And we even met people we knew in this situation. By the way, they came from Frankfurt, they came from Berlin, they came from Munich, they came from Essen, they came from all over the German. Yes? I was 6.5 when it started. If I'm born in 31, it happened in 38. I was 6.5 years old. And and my brother was 3.5 years old, so he was 10. Not quite 10, but close enough. And so we were in this stable for 3 days, 3 or 4 days, and then they changed the environment. They put us into a place called Die Mühle, which was an old mill, and they set up mattresses on floors, some mattresses with on beds, and it was like a big dormitory. They set us up, and so that's where we went. My father, after some time, because he was Polish, was able to leave that environment. The rest of us were not. My mother was not able to, my brother and I were not able to. So my father was able to leave because he was a Polish citizen, and he then was able to rent a room in somebody's home in this town of Spongin, which gave him more freedom to move around and to see what he could do to change our life and bring us back together in that Polish community. And it took some time, but 3 or 4 months later, we left this environment, and my father had rented a room on a farm. It was one big bedroom and served to do everything. So we were reunited and became a family again in that situation. And there were many people around us in this little town, which was right outside of Spongin. It was called Nonia. And that's where we lived. So let me move it a little fast forward. In April of 1939, by then I was 7 years old. My birthday is in December. April of 1939, my father and other heads of household were permitted to go back to Germany to take care of the house that we left, because we had to leave in an hour, so all we did was lock the door. So we had to take care of the house, we had to take care of the car, we had to take care of bank accounts, I'm sure. And so my father went back and left us in April of 1939. So he was in Germany, and he, while in Germany, instead of coming back to us, was sent by a friend of his a permit to travel on a ship to Cuba. And he would then come from Cuba to the United States. His friend had been his partner in business, and this guy was in the United States, and he was able to do that. And so my parents had to decide, does my father come back to Poland, or does he take this opportunity to take the ship? And so my parents decided that he would take the ship. By the way, it wasn't by cell phone. It had to be in some other form of communication, which did occur, but I don't know quite the communication that occurred. And so my father decided, and my mother decided that he would go on the ship, go to Cuba, come to the United States and then hopefully bring us over. The ship he went on is called the St. Louis. The St. Louis, if you look, go to the library and look it up, you'll find the St. Louis was not permitted into Cuba when they got there. And so the captain of the ship, German captain of the ship, had to decide, what does he do with 900 passengers on a ship? And he knows that most of them, if he went back to Germany, would never survive. That was obvious. And so the captain took the ship, had to leave port in Cuba, in Havana, Cuba, and then was right off the coast of Miami Beach. Florida, right there, and he made requests that countries accept these passengers. And so the countries he asked to accept the passengers, United States and South American countries. The United States said no, and all the other countries in the Western Hemisphere said no. And so the captain had to take the ship, and the United States said to the captain, get out of American waters, go into international waters, and leave. And so the captain left, and he was able to contact Belgium, who was willing to accept the ship, and 3 other countries then joined in accepting the people. Belgium, France, England, and Holland. My father ended up in Holland. I don't know how that selection took place, but he ended up in what we still call Holland, but also the Netherlands. And so that's where my father is. So let me leave him there, and now take you back to Poland, where my brother and I, and my mother, are still there. So what the next step is, for my mother, how do I get my children out of Poland? Because the concept of war was certainly there. The feeling of that was there. And my mother was absolutely right. And so she made every move possible to find out where she could send her children and how she could get them out of Poland. So, the British government in November of 1938, after what the Germans called Kristallnacht, where they smashed every store's window, every Jewish store's windows and so on and so forth, they decided, the government decided that they would accept 10,000 children from the continent, the European continent. You know, England is kind of separated by the English Channel from the rest of Europe. And so they decided the British government decided to take 10,000 children, and my mother applied, and my brother and I were accepted. So, my father left us in April of 39. In June of 39, my mother went to the railroad station and put her 2 sons on the train, which was heading for Warsaw, Poland, which was the capital, because the collection of these Kindertransport kids in Poland was right outside of Warsaw, in a town called Odwadzki. And so here we were at the end of June 1939, and we were on the way to Warsaw. Now, as you were told, it's not an easy experience for a parent to take a child and put them on a train and say goodbye to them, not knowing if they'll ever see them again. Because that was the possibility. And so we were then on that train. We ended up in Warsaw. We were then taken to a collecting town called Odwadzki, which is right outside of Warsaw. And so this is now end of June 39, beginning of July 1939, and we were there waiting to be taken to England. Well, the rule of that decision by the British government was, if we're going to accept 10,000 children, the Jewish organizations of London have to make arrangements with families who have to be willing to accept those children. And so Jewish organizations did that. And so we know that 2 kindertransports left Poland prior to August of 1939. One was somewhere in March and one was somewhere in June. And we were supposed to leave in July. They couldn't find sufficient number of families to accept all the children. And so finally, by August 24th, now you were just told a little while ago that World War II began September 1, 1939, when Hitler invaded Poland. So we were still in Poland August 24th, 1939. And so it was finally decided that they would send the children to England for those youngsters who have been accepted by people in England. That left some kids not being able to go on that transport because they had no families to go to. And so August 24th, the director of the program read names of those going. My brother's was right at the top of the list. I ended up at the bottom of the list. It was kind of a squeaky situation in terms of not knowing if you were on or not on. But my name was finally called. And so we were then taken the next morning, put on buses. We went to the Warsaw Railroad Station, and we knew war was beginning because you saw military men all over the place. And so they put us on trains, and the train left Warsaw and worked its way through west of Warsaw, and we ended up in the city called Gdynia. Gdynia was the port city of Poland. And we took a ship called the Warszawa. We put on the ship, and we went to England. And we arrived in England August 29, 1939. 3 days later, Hitler bombed Warsaw, and what we know is that the bombs hit that area where we were located in that little town outside of Warsaw, and those kids never made it. So then we were in England, and we were distributed among the families that they would accept us. And we had one child, a guy my age, attached himself to us on the train going from Warsaw to Gdynia, and he decided there's no way that he's not going to come with us. And so even though we were not on the original list to be accepted by the particular, that he was not permitted, he was not on the list to go to the family that we were going to, he kind of cried, and I kind of helped him, and so he came with us. His name is Joseph Camille, and I'll tell you a lot more about him later. So then, we went to these Jewish families, and we were registered in schools, and so we were sent. We were out of Poland. That still leaves my mother in Poland, although by that time she had left. What she did, once her children were gone, she made every move possible to get out of Poland and go back to Germany, see her parents, and get to the United States. And so what my mother did was, she went back to Germany, saw her parents, and did everything possible to come to the United States. But what you need to come to the United States is a visa. I mean, that's true in some other countries as well. Even today, you need a visa, a document saying they're willing to accept you. And so my mother wrote her uncle, who lived in Miami Beach, Florida, and in New York City, and asked him for a visa. He didn't send it. She sent the letter again. He didn't send it. She finally asked the first cousin who had the same uncle, please go see our uncle and see if he'll send me a visa. And he says to her cousin, I don't know anything about this. His wife had torn up the letters because she was concerned there would be responsibility for someone she didn't really want to have responsibility for. Well, the uncle finally sent the visa, and my mother worked her way out of Germany to Genoa, Italy. And this was, we're talking about 1939, 1940. Worked her way to Italy and was going to visit my father in Holland. But my father indicated to her, do not do that. It doesn't look like a good idea. And so my mother ended up on an American ship in April of 1940 and worked her way, and the ship came to the United States. So she was the first one to arrive in the United States. My brother and I, who were in England, living with this family in London, that came to a quick close because in the middle of September 1939, because war had been declared by England against Germany as well, the British government decided to send all school children out of the major cities, like London, into the countryside. And so the 6 kids who came out of Poland on actually the 6 kids who went to that school that we were assigned to in England, in London, 3 boys, 3 girls, ended up in the town of Talaton, T-A-L-A-T-O-N, and it was definitely the countryside, and we were then assigned to families in Talaton. Now, we went from the requirement that we be part of a Jewish family, and we ended up in a Christian society. And these people were wonderful. They took us in, they made homes for us, and they took care of us. And we were with a family, a daughter and a mother, who lived in a house called Rose Cottage. And again, that mother and daughter selected my brother and me to go. Joseph was not part of that. Joseph cried, made noise, I made noise, he came with us. It was remarkable. And so we were then with this family, this mother and daughter, and we were registered in school. So we were in a 2-room schoolhouse, and with this large number of kids who came from London, for this society, which only has a 2-room schoolhouse, it was not large enough for all these kids who came. And so they had to make arrangements, special arrangements, to have half days. So some of the kids went from early morning to noon or whatever, and then another group from noon to whatever, 4 o'clock. But that's what the accommodations that people made for us. And so my brother and I and Joseph were in the same household, and we became real buddies. My brother and I had a visit from my mother's other brother, who had been in England since 1936 and now was a member of the British Army, and he had fought against the Germans originally in Dunkirk and Calais, where the British lost. And he came to visit us when he came back from there. And then when he left us, helped to make arrangements to get my brother and I to come to see, to be part of our life with our mother, who is now in the United States. So my brother and I left England September 1, 1940. So we had to say goodbye to Joseph, who had become like a brother to us. And we went from London to Glasgow, Scotland, where we took a ship called the Cameronia, and we went to the United States. In those times, the German government had U-boats, submarines, all over the Atlantic Ocean, destroying all kinds of ships. And the ship in back of us was sunk, the ship in front of us was sunk. Somehow our ship made it. And so we came to the United States. Our mother greeted us at the pier, and my mother was, by that time, working as a housekeeper, full-time housekeeper. She didn't speak a word of English when she came in. And so we were not able to live with her initially. And so she had made arrangements for us to live with some other people. So we became a kind of two foster children in somebody's home. But my mother she knew where we were. And she was a housekeeper in a town called Great Neck, where I now live. So my mother is in New York, my brother and I are in New York. My father is still in Holland. Hitler and the Nazi regime entered Holland late 1941, early 42. And so now, the camp that my father was assigned to, the area to live in, was now taken by the German government and became a concentration camp. And it was a shipping concentration camp. And so, by shipping, I mean they sent people out on a regular basis to Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, and those were camps that killed people, gas chambers, and so on and so on. And many of those people died in gas chambers. And so my father, for some reason, survived that situation. He never left that camp. He spoke many languages. He was very bright. I don't know what he did in that camp or didn't do in that camp, but that's one thing he never talked about. But he was never shut down. So the Canadian Army in April 1945 came into that camp and freed it from the Germans. My father was now a free man. It was April of 45. By June of 45, there was a first opportunity for my father to call us. Actually, the arrangements were made by my mother in the United States. We didn't have phone situations like we have today. You had to make an appointment to have long-distance phone calls between England, between Holland and the United States. So on a Sunday morning in June, that arrangement was made, and we spoke to my father for the first time since 1939. So this was now 1946. And we spoke about 5 minutes. This was 1945, I apologize, not 1946. 1945, in June of 1945 we spoke. And it took a year for my father to be able to come to the United States. And so he accompanied children who were what we call hidden children during World War II. And they were hidden from the German government, and many of them lost their parents, so my father accompanied those children to the United States. They arrived in Penn Station, New York, and by train because they landed in Mobile, Alabama. And we became a family again in July of 1946. So that's where that ended. And I think we'll stop here and have some questions. and then I can, or maybe I should tell you a little bit about an experience my brother and I and our families just had a weekend ago. Not this past weekend, but the one before. My brother has written a book called Nightmare's Fairy Tale. And this book was read by someone in Tullerton, England, the town that we were in. And my brother gets a call from a guy by the name of Tom Sampson, who lives there, who is an amateur playwright. And he wants to write a play about the story. And he asked my brother if it's okay to use information from his book. And my brother said, sure. And so the play was performed a week ago. And on Saturday night, April 30th, my brother and I, my son and daughter-in-law, one of my children and his wife, my brother's 3 children and one of the wives, and Joseph Camille, the guy who attached himself to us, and his daughter and his son and his grandchild all arrived to witness the play called Tullerton, a Wartime Refuge. In this little town of Tullerton, the people were unbelievable. They all came out. They all came to hear the play, see the play. There was a reception, and my brother and I met for the first time one of the girls who came with us on the Kindertanzsport but didn't end up in the same town as we did. So for us, it was the first visit. So it was like she was in awe as we were in awe that we met in Tullerton, England. Now the 3 girls, just as an aside, their parents never survived the war. So they were then adopted by the families that they were part of. And they converted to Christianity, and they had families, and we met those families. We met children and grandchildren, and it was an awesome experience. So that's what happened there. Joseph, by the way, after we left him, he stayed with his family, this mother and daughter, until 1947. So he was with his family from 1939, September of 39, to 1947. So we're talking about 9 years. 9 years. 8 years. 8 years. He never wanted to leave these people. His mother didn't show up until 1947. She, during World War II, ended up in Siberia with her children, 2 of her 2 daughters, and they survived. One daughter went to Palestine. One daughter lives in Belgium. The mother arrived in England in 47. Joseph really didn't want to go there to be with his mother. He wanted to stay with these 2 women. But the authorities said he must return to be with his mother. And so he did. He then became a very successful businessman in England and had a wonderful family who we got to meet just last weekend, a weekend ago. So that's basically my story. And if there are any questions, we're ready to go. Yes, sir. What was it like on the train? Which train now? The one going from Szpagin to Warsaw or from Warsaw to Gdynia? It was a feeling of people. We all knew what was happening to us. There was no doubt about that. We were happy that we were getting out of Poland. We were wise enough to see military and say, time to leave. But we were well taken care of. I have to admit that. It wasn't the most luxurious railroad car, but it was comfortable, and we were well taken care of. Yes, sir. What's that? I can't hear you, loud and clear. How old was I when I came to the United States? Well, figure it out. I arrived here in September of 1940, and I was born in 31. I was a little over 8 years, I was 8 years old, heading for 9. So let me go back there because my ears don't hear as well as yours. Yes, ma'am. How do I feel? You know, it's an interesting question. I don't know how to answer it because I don't remember the drama of that.
So then ask, how did he feel when the police showed up at his door?
Right, right. I mean, as my brother pointed out to me, that policeman he used to walk the neighborhood and used to be very charming to us. You know, local guy. He wasn't so charming that morning, that's for sure. Yes, sir.
Have you ever seen Hitler?
What's that?
Have you ever seen Hitler?
Have I ever seen Hitler? Well, I'm not sure, but I'll give you something that I did as a kid. And most probably I did see Hitler. Across the street from where I lived was a big soccer stadium. You know, soccer is a major sport in Europe. Big soccer stadium. And there was a major event going on, major Nazi activity. And my brother and I, which shouldn't surprise you, we were kids, snuck under the gate of that event, and supposedly Hitler was on that stage, but I can't guarantee that one. Let's see. Let's go to this corner. Yes, sir.
What was it like on
The
the ship?
ship? It was, which one? The one going from Poland to England or England to the United States?
England to the United States.
It was fine. It was the ship. We were well fed, well taken care of. Supposedly there was a couple supposed to take care of us. For some reason, I can't remember seeing them for one moment. My brother and I were independent and we did things on board that we most probably shouldn't have done, but we did it anyway. Yes, sir.
Have you been in the gas chamber before, and how did you survive it?
So my answer to you is, I didn't even get close to a gas chamber because I was never in that kind of situation. That happened after we had left Germany and Poland. Okay. Yes, sir. Say that again? No, Joseph is gone, I'm sorry to say. Joseph died some years ago of prostate cancer. It was the first time I met his children and one of his grandchildren. But my brother and I went to England quite a few times and we saw Joseph and we were in touch with him. My brother more so than I, but yeah, we had contact. And in fact, my brother had contact with Joseph's mother because he taught at Oxford University for 6 months. Yes? Do I speak German? I speak German, but it's not as sophisticated as it used to be. I spoke better when I was 8 than I speak today. Yes? I've thought about that. The question was I afraid about something happening to me when I was in Germany? I had my family, and I was younger than you guys are. And so I can't say to you I was afraid, and that is the real fear. I was definitely uncomfortable. And by the way, at the end of this thing, I was a pretty messed up kid when things came to a head. My father arrived in 1940. I was a nail biter, a stutterer. I could never have been a principal if I was a stutterer. As a nail biter, a stutterer, a thumb sucker, and a bedwetter. I was 14, 15 years old. My father arrives in the United States. 3 weeks later, it all goes away. So it tells you something about being part of a family unit. There were some other hands. Back over there. Yes, sir. What's that? The Nazis was a party that Hitler developed, and that he was then elected as Chancellor of the German government, and so he was then in control. He became a dictator, and so it became his army. That's not today. Today it's a totally different society. They are part of NATO, they're part of some of the stuff we talked about. Yes? Well, the question was, how did it feel that I may never see my family again? I'm a pretty positive thinker. I don't think I ever thought that. It's what my mother and father thought, but not what my brother. I shouldn't even say that about my brother. He should speak for himself. But certainly, in my case, I never consciously thought about that when I see them again. I became more conscious of that when I became older and my father was in concentration camp in Holland in the 1940s, 41, 42, 43, 44. Then we always wondered, will he survive or won't he survive? There was some in the back there. Yes? Well, that was the question that was just asked, and I can tell you I was not. I'm not conscious of it. And I said, about my father, I was more conscious about him than I was about my mother, because my mother was already with us. But my father, as I got older, I became much more conscious of that thought. Yes? I can't hear you. Louder. What did I?
Were you scared?
Was I afraid? Not a conscious fear. Not a conscious fear. Was I messed up, as I just described? Sure. Sure. Yes, sir.
I think you have a question. What are you most grateful for?
Ah,
What was the question?
great question.
Most grateful. What was the question?
What am I most grateful for? I would think, well, first, that my family survived as a unit. That was major. The people who took care of us and helped us survive, unbelievable. And that was a feeling I had in Tallaght, England, this past weekend. I just couldn't get over it in terms of how these people came out now and came out then. And there were one or two survivors, even in that town, who were there when we arrived, so it was that. And then I got professionally, my brother and I were very successful in this country. Had the privilege of going to public school and so on and so forth. And that we then lived a so-called normal life. But in your background, that never leaves you. But I'm grateful for that. And I have children and grandchildren, and it's can't be better than that. was elected. He was evil? He was evil because he wanted to do away with a certain people, such as Jewish people. He was, to me, any dictator is evil to begin with, so let's start there, right? I have problems with dictatorships. That's a politics, by the way. What's that? He was elected by the people. There was an election in the 30s.
He just can't
What's that?
understand how something like that can happen, how someone like that can get elected.
The Nazis were.
He was what? Oh, it fell off? Oh, okay. I think I'm missing the word. Propaganda? Well, you know, we can talk about propaganda as a separate entity. Do you think that in any election that we have in the United States, when somebody puts out advertisements about themselves as propaganda, or that's... Tell again? Let's say that.
Don't worry about it. Just leave
There
it.
you go.
You're okay.
So, sure, it's propaganda. Sure. Lots of propaganda. And as you most probably recognize at your age, that if somebody decides who gets leadership and they want to really go after a certain segment of that society, that's possible. You were going to ask a question. Say that again? What age? How old was he or me? Was it? How old was he? 40? How old was he? I don't know. That's one thing I don't know. A few things I don't know, but not that. Yes? Are you talking about the 1936 Olympics? We were not there. No, no. But the 1936 Olympics were exactly as you were describing. He wanted everybody to believe everything was normal. Ask some of our American runners about that. They're not around anymore. Yes, ma'am. I was principal of a junior high school called Adrian Block in the town of Flushing, New York, on Francis Lewis Boulevard and 35th Avenue. Oh, our kids graduated from that building. Yeah, yeah. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Well, was I ever afraid about my father? The answer to that is, when I became more mature, as I aged, and I became 10 and 11, yes, I was. But that worked out. How many questions can we still do?
We'll do about two more.
Two more? There's somebody in the back, in the way back, last row. Yes.
When the country, like, when the ferries go in, is that because they wanted them to be safe, or they just didn't want to deal with the country?
Say that again?
When you went to, like, all the countries that
Right.
protected you, was it because they didn't want to deal with you, or because they wanted you to be safe?
Well, countries don't want people coming without their permission. So, when Hitler put us on trains in Germany and sent us to the Polish border and put us right at the Polish border, the Poles locals did not want us. They didn't want us because, one, nobody told them we were coming. Number two, we didn't apply. You know, and it becomes a tremendous burden for a country to just accept people. So, no country wants to take in other people without permission and without visas.
Watch your feet, guys.
Last question. My young ears don't hear that. Say that again. Did? Whom do I look up to? My brother. Without him, I would not have survived. And my brother went on to become professor of American history at Cornell University, so he's not bad. And he's alive. In fact, he's having it published May 22nd on American history. One more? Okay. Say that again? That's right. We have no idea. No idea. No idea. I thank you very much, everybody. You are